Had a knock on his head when he was a kid, I should think." "No, I don't think it's that," replied the Honourable James Barker. "I've sometimes fancied he was a sort of artist, Lambert." "Bosh!" cried Mr. Lambert briefly. "I admit I can't make him out," resumed Barker abstractedly. "He never opens his mouth without saying something so indescribably half-witted that to call him a fool seems the very feeblest attempt at characterization. But there's another thing about him that's rather funny. Do you know that he has the one collection of Japanese lacquer in Europe? Have you ever seen his books? All Greek poets and mediaeval French and that sort of thing. Have you ever been in his rooms? It's like being inside an amethyst. And he moves about in all that and talks like a turnip." "Well, damn all books. Your blue books as well," said the ingenuous Mr. Lambert, with a friendly simplicity. "You ought to understand such things. What do you make of him?" "He's beyond me," returned Barker. "But if you asked me for my opinion, I should say he was a man with a taste for nonsense, as they call it, artistic fooling, and all that kind of thing. And I seriously believe that he has talked nonsense so much that he has half bewildered his own mind, and doesn't know the difference between sanity and insanity. He has gone round the metal world, so to speak, and found the place where the East and the West are one, and extreme idiocy is as good as sense. But I can't explain these psychological games." "You can't explain them to me," replied Mr. Wilfrid Lambert with candour. As they passed up the long streets towards their restaurant, the copper twilight cleared slowly to a pale yellow, and by the time they reached it, they stood discernible in a tolerable winter daylight. The Honourable James Barker, one of the most powerful officials in the English Government, by this time a rigidly official one, was a lean and elegant young man with a blank, handsome face and bleak blue eyes. He had a great amount of intellectual capacity, of that peculiar kind which raises a man from throne to throne, and lets him die loaded with honours, without having either amused or enlightened the mind of a single man. Wilfrid Lambert, the youth with the nose which appeared to impoverish the rest of his face, had also contributed little to the enlargement of the human spirit, but he had the honourable excuse of being a fool. Lambert would have been called a silly man. Barker, with all his cleverness, might have been called a stupid man, but mere silliness and stupidity sank into insignificance in the presence of the awful and mysterious treasures of foolishness apparently stored up in the small figure that stood waiting for them outside Cicconani's. The little man, whose name was Auberon Quin, had an appearance compounded of a baby and an owl. His round head, round eyes, seemed to have been designed by nature playfully with a pair of compasses. His flat dark hair and preposterously long frock coat gave him something of the look of a child's Noah. When he entered a room of strangers they mistook him for a small boy, and wanted to take him on their knees until he spoke, when they perceived that a boy would have been more intelligent. "I have been waiting quite a long time," said Quin mildly. "It's awfully funny I should see you coming up the street at last." "Why?" asked Lambert, staring. "You told us to come here yourself." "My mother used to tell people to come places," said the sage. They were about to turn into the restaurant with a resigned air, when their eyes were caught by something in the street. The weather, though cold and blank, was now quite clear, and across the dull brown of the wood pavement and between the dull grey terraces was moving something not to be seen for miles around, not to be seen, perhaps, at that time in England. A man dressed in bright colours. A small crowd hung on the man's heels. He was a tall, stately man, clad in a military uniform of brilliant green, splashed with great silver facings. From the shoulder swung a short green furrowed cloak, somewhat like that of a hussar, the lining of which gleamed every now and then with a kind of tawny crimson. His breast glittered with medals, round his neck was the red ribbon and star of some foreign order, and a long straight sword with a blazing hilt trailed and clattered along the pavement. At this time the pacific and utilitarian development of Europe had relegated all such customs to the museums. The only remaining force, the small but well-organized police, were attired in a sombre and hygienic manner. But even those who remembered the last Life Guards and Lancers who disappeared in 1912 must have known at a glance that this was not, and never had been, an English uniform; and this conviction would have been heightened by the yellow aquiline face, like Dante, carved in bronze, which rose crowned with white hair out of the green military collar, a keen and distinguished, but not an English face. The magnificence with which the green-clad gentleman walked down the centre of the road would be something difficult to express in human language, for it was an ingrained simplicity and an arrogance, something in the mere carriage of the head and body, which made ordinary moderns in the street stare after him. But it had comparatively little to do with actual conscious gestures or expression. In the manner of these merely temporary movements, the man appeared to be rather worried and inquisitive; but he was inquisitive with the inquisitiveness of a despot, and worried as with the responsibilities of a god. The men who lounged and wondered behind him followed partly with an astonishment at his brilliant uniform; that is to say, partly because of that instinct which makes us all follow one who looks like a madman, but far more because of that instinct which makes all men follow and worship any one who chooses to behave like a king. He had so sublime an extent, that great quality of royalty, an almost imbecilic unconsciousness of everybody, that people went after him as they do after kings, to see what would be the first thing or person he would take notice of. And all the time, as we have said, in spite of his quiet splendour, there was an air about him as if he were looking for somebody, an expression of inquiry. Suddenly that expression of inquiry vanished, none could tell why, and was replaced by an expression of contentment. Amid the rapt attention of the mob of idlers, the magnificent green gentleman deflected himself from his direct course down the centre of the road, and walked to one side of it. He came to a halt opposite to a large poster of Coleman's mustard, erected on a wooden boarding. His spectators almost held their breath. He took from a small pocket in his uniform a little penknife. With this he made a slash at the stretched paper. Completing the rest of the operation with his fingers, he tore off a strip or rag of paper, yellow in colour and wholly irregular in outline. Then, for the first time, the great being addressed his adoring onlookers. "Can anyone," he said, with a pleasing foreign accent, "lend me a pin?" Mr. Lambert, who happened to be nearest, and who carried innumerable pins for the purpose of attaching innumerable buttonholes, lent him one, which was received with extravagant but dignified bows and hyperboles of thanks. The gentleman in green then, with every appearance of being gratified and even puffed up, pinned the piece of yellow paper to the green silk and silver lace adornments of his breast. Then he turned his eyes round again, searching and unsatisfied. "Anything else I can do, sir?" asked Lambert, with the absurd politeness of the English when once embarrassed. "Red," said the stranger vaguely. "Red." "I beg your pardon?" "I beg yours also, Señor," said the stranger, bowing. "I was wondering whether any of you had any red about you." "Any red about us? Well, really, no. I don't think I have. I used to carry a red bandana once, but—" "Barker," asked Auberon Quin suddenly, "where's your red cockatoo? Where is your red cockatoo?" "What do you mean?" asked Barker desperately. "What cockatoo? You've never seen me with any cockatoo." "I know," said Auberon, vaguely mollified. "Where's it been all the time?" Barker swung round, not without resentment. "I am sorry, sir," he said, shortly but civilly. "None of us seem to have anything red to lend you. But why, if one may ask?" "I thank you, Señor. It is nothing. I can, since there is nothing else, fulfil my own requirements." And standing for a second of thought, with the penknife in his hand, he stabbed his left palm. The blood fell with so full a stream that it struck the stones without dripping. The foreigner pulled out his handkerchief and tore a piece from it with his teeth. The rag was immediately soaked in scarlet. "Since you are so generous, Señor," he said, "another pin, perhaps?" Lambert held one out, with eyes protruding like a frog's. The red linen